For those of you who aren't from Florida, welcome to our oasis of freedom. Florida is leading in protecting our vulnerable residents, saving the economy, and safeguarding the freedom of our people. In Florida, schools are open. Every Floridian has a right to earn a living, and all businesses have a right to operate. Now, we are stronger as a state and much happier as a people because of this leadership.
This is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis delivering the welcome remark during the 2021 CPAC. Florida leads to reopen the economy and the schools successfully during the pandemic. The governor took advice from a reopening task force. A local free market think tank, the James Madison Institute, was part of that task force. I talked to the president and CEO of James Madison Institute, Robert McClure, to find out what kind of advices they provided. Also, Florida did pretty well in the 2020 election, so how they came out from a controversial year 2000 election to thus far, let's find out. Actually, your institute have been doing a lot of work with the governor in terms of how to open the state. So tell us about the most important things in terms of how you open with a safe and environment.
Sure. Well, if you remember, there was the initial lockdown across the country, the 2 weeks to slow the spread. After that, the governor had put together a Reopen Florida task force, and he really wanted to do three things. First of all, he wanted to protect the elderly. Florida has the second largest elderly population in the entire country. So he wanted to protect them first. The second thing he wanted to do was to protect the most vulnerable, so those who are immunocompromised and those kinds of things. So he wanted to protect them. But then the third thing he said was, we are not going to lock down the state of Florida. We are going to allow cities and municipalities to make their own decisions. So, for example, Florida's largest county is 2.7 million people, Miami-Dade County, at the very tip of the southern part of the state. Florida's smallest county only has 10,000 people in it. And so that's quite a wide disparity. And so the governor said we're not going to have a one-size-fits-all and lock down the entire state. We're going to allow each county and each municipality to make their own decisions, socially distance, contact tracing and quarantining when needed, wearing masks if required, but the state is not going to make that decision, unlike in California, where the governor has locked down the entire state. In Florida, Governor DeSantis said we're going to allow municipalities at the local level to make the decisions that work best for them.
California is probably the most locked down state, and Florida is probably most open.
Right, that's exactly right. And you see whether it's hospitalizations or infection rates or death rates, Florida and California are basically even. So imagine if California had been able to keep its economy open. When it comes to economic growth and economic drivers, Florida far, far exceeds California right now because we never closed down our economy. California, Governor Newsom chose to do that. And so that's critically important. We saved small businesses, we saved jobs. Many people don't know that Florida has a significant agricultural component. And so you don't need to lock down agriculture. They're outside, they're socially distanced as it is anyway. And yet in maybe Miami or where there is a community of elderly people, as you know, a lot of retirees in Florida, those communities maybe need to be more stringent to protect themselves. That's okay, but let the groups and individuals on the ground make the decision, not a bureaucrat in Sacramento or Tallahassee make that decision. Allow freedom and personal responsibility to take hold, and you can keep your economy open. Florida's proven that.
Yeah, so you actually answered my question, saying what's the really the principle behind all those decisions.
Right. That's it. It's personal responsibility and freedom. And so let those local municipalities make the decisions that are best for them, and they will do it. There's a community, for example, in Central Florida that is comprised of primarily retirees, people over 65. It's about 250,000 people live in this planned community in Central Florida. Well, they had much more stringent rules because they were vulnerable. So for a while, they didn't let their grandchildren come into the community, and there was stricter rules about masks and social distancing. They never locked down, but they had certainly more strict rules. That's okay, because that community at the local level made the decision. Other communities across the state, there's one in the northeast corner of the state, has about 1 million people, Jacksonville, Florida. They never locked down. They have socially distanced, they have mask mandates, but they never locked down, and they allowed their economy and their small businesses to stay open. So each individual community is able to make the decision that is best for them.
Yeah, so talking about election integrity, which is a hot topic right now, your institute also did a lot of work. So tell us about that.
We did. The night of the election, on November 3rd, we knew by 10 p.m. Eastern time who would won every election in Florida. We have a state of 22 million people. We're the third largest state in the country. As I said earlier, the largest county has 2.7 million and the smallest county has 11,000. That's quite a wide disparity, much like California, a wide disparity. And yet, because of the checks and balances that we had in place in Florida, because they were able to begin counting votes, mail-in votes and absentee votes before Election Day, we knew by election night who had won every ballot or every race in the state of Florida. And I think that's critically important, because if the process is tainted, then the election winner is automatically tainted, regardless of whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. So we would propose in Florida, and one of the initiatives we're working on here in Florida is that we are taking kind of the best practices that we did in Florida, and we're taking that initiative to other states. So we're taking what we've done in Florida to fix things, no ballot harvesting, transparency, poll watching, transparency, vote counting, no paper ballots, a lot of these kind of best practices that we fixed, and taking it to other states so that they can also fix their voter integrity laws as well. It's critically important, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, for the process to be fair and transparent. If it's not, and regardless of who the winner is, it's very hard to govern if people think an election was not counted and votes were not counted properly.
So in terms of you referring to what you said you're taking to other states, how do you do that?
We have put together, or in the process, we haven't put it together yet, we're in the process of putting together an analysis of what Florida did. If you remember, after the 2000 election, Bush versus Gore, Florida was kind of the laughing stock of the country. But we fixed all of those issues, and so we are putting together kind of a best practices component of what we did to fix our election issues, and then we're going to states like Arizona, like Georgia, and 4 or 5 of the other states to bring together all of the decision makers and help them with our advice and best practices, help them understand how to fix their issues. They can do it if they have the will to do it, and I think many of them will do that.
Yeah, so also one issue about the election process is the mail-in ballot. H.R. 1 right now is trying to nationalize the mail-in ballot. So in Florida, is the same thing, or what's the difference?
Yeah, first of all, we don't want to nationalize the election process, because that will just consolidate power in Washington, D.C. And regardless of who's running Washington, D.C., you don't want Republicans or Democrats telling people in California, people in Florida, how they're supposed to run elections. You don't want to do that. The Founding Fathers understood that you diffuse power to the states. You don't concentrate power in one place like Washington, D.C. So regardless of who's in power in Washington, we never want to federalize elections. Having said that, the H.R. 1 is very, very dangerous. And so what we've done in Florida is we have eliminated the paper ballot. We have improved our machine counting. We have allowed Republican and Democratic poll watchers to get close to the vote counting. We have allowed for mail-in ballot. And to your question, the signature, you have to request a mail-in ballot within a certain amount of time. Your signature has to match the signature that they have on file with a mail-in ballot. When you sign your mail-in ballot, you are also essentially signing an affidavit, which is a legal document that if you are not the one signing it, you can be held accountable and go to jail. And then it's mailed into, the election supervisor, and then you can track it online. You can follow it online. You can see if your vote gets counted. And if your vote is counted, then everything's great and you can see it online. But if for some reason the day of your vote is not counted, you can still show up at the poll and cast a provisional vote. So you have to request it. You have to have a matching signature on file, and you are signing a legal document, an affidavit, when you do your mail-in voting. And so all three of those serve as kind of guardrails to keep people from cheating on mail-in voting.
Yeah, but how do you resolve issues? For example, maybe double, even triple, or or that people receiving, or people who moved receiving mail-in ballots, and it could be taken advantage of.
Every 2 years, Florida purges its rolls, and so it checks its rolls to make sure that dead people or people who have moved out of the state are not trying to vote. They're not perfect. We still have a ways to go, but Florida has done a great job of systematically making sure that they are not sending out ballots to people who no longer live here. Florida doesn't send out mass ballots. I know that was done in California and some other states. You have to request the ballot, so that makes a big difference. If you request a ballot, for Florida, but you live in Sacramento, they're not going to send you that ballot. So it has to be a request on the part of the voter.
Another concern is the voting machine. Yeah, so how's that from?
In Florida, we have ink, like an ink pen oval that you fill in. And so the voting machines are tested weeks in advance. Republicans and Democrats are there to help and watch over the testing. And then on Election Day, you have both Republican and Democratic poll watchers there. So the goal is to do a lot of this well ahead of Election Day. Not Election Day, but well ahead. So we can even start counting mail-in votes and absentee ballots 2 weeks ahead of time. Now, we don't know who's winning. We don't know how many Trump has or how many Joe Biden has, but we do know how many Democrats voted or how many Republicans voted. And so by election night, we might have a third of all ballots cast in Florida counted. And so those who show up on Election Day, they can use the machines, which have already been tested. They've been signed off on by Republicans and Democrats. So there's no manipulation there. There are poll watchers of both Republicans and Democrats there on Election Day. And then those are counted. And as I said, we knew by 10 p.m. who had won the election in Florida.
By the way, what's the voting machine you use?
Oh gosh, I can't remember the name of it. I'm sorry. Yeah.
So when do you expect such best practice being compiled and shared with other states?
I would expect that to be in late spring. So we're in the process of putting that together now. Everything we do is well researched and peer reviewed, so it needs to be clear that it's been done right. And I would expect us to have that by late spring that we can then share with other states on what we're doing.
Well, we should be ready for the next midterm.
Right. That's right. And because we need to work on fixing these voting issues now. We need to work on states like Arizona and Georgia and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan. We need to work on those things now. And so there's an opportunity and there's a hunger to see what Florida got right and how Florida got things right. And that's why we're doing that study.
Wonderful. Thank you, Robert, for sharing with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So that's Mr. Robert McClure with the James Madison Institute.